This is a game controller. More specifically, a DualShock 4 PlayStation gamepad. Early arcade and computer games may have used joysticks and keyboards, but with the meteoric rise of console gaming in the 90s, the gamepad quickly asserted itself as the ideal way to play games on the living room TV while lazing on the sofa. All was well and good with the world until 2008 when Apple unleashed the App Store. Playing games with a touchscreen might have seemed like a hard sell to console gamers at the time, but clearly it worked out because today, at $173 billion, the mobile gaming industry is worth more than the PC and console gaming markets combined. There's just one problem. A mobile game can't survive if it requires a separate controller just to work, and so most of them involve touchscreen controls like this, but for fighting games, racing games, and plenty of other genres, having physical buttons is still just preferable, and that's where this comes in, the backbone. At a cool 7 inches contracted and 10 inches at full extension, this $100 strap-on turns your iPhone into a mind-blowing new gaming experience for iPhone. Well, that's what the overexcited Backbone homepage says at least. When you get it out the box, what you get essentially is one D-pad, 2 clickable analog sticks, 4 action buttons on the front, and 4 shoulder buttons on top, 2 of which are analog trigger style. Sounds like anything familiar? That's right. It's basically what you get on an Xbox One or PlayStation 4 controller, which brings us to the real reason why the Backbone exists. Just want to point out that Backbone sent me this unit for the purposes of this review, but they didn't ask me to say anything specific, and all opinions are completely my own. One look at this box and you can already see exactly what's going on here. Backbone's not some deluded company that thinks that people really want a separate controller so they can play Frogger Mobile on their iPhones. Clearly they think that cloud gaming subscription services like Xbox Game Pass and others are going to be the next big thing. And you know what? They're probably spot on. And if your internet connection is fast enough, many games might play just fine, if not better. Even though Backbone includes a 3-month free trial for Xbox Game Pass, cloud gaming is available basically everywhere on Earth except, perhaps unsurprisingly, Japan, which is where I live. So let's see then what the App Store has to offer. First, let's start with the good stuff. Asphalt 8 Airborne Plus is a racing game that works nicely with the Backbone, taking full advantage of the analog sticks for steering and analog triggers for accelerating. That being said, it's one of those thrilling speed games, so choosing when to nitro boost is probably more crucial than gently finessing the throttle. Fortunately, Assetto Corsa just made the jump from serious PC racing sim to a mobile version. It claims to be controller compatible at launch, but when I tested it, the situation was not quite right. See, this mobile game based on Assetto Corsa is clearly trying to provide a more realistic racing sim experience, but when trying it with the Backbone, the opposite seems to be true. The analog sticks are hypersensitive no matter what setting I put it on, so tilting 1 degree left barely moves the car, and then 2 degrees left and I'm practically driving off the road. And even though the throttle and brake control is super important in a racing sim, the analog triggers offered no real advantage because they only appear to register as one of 2 settings: absolutely flooring it or not accelerating at all. So using the controller with Assetto Corsa Mobile hasn't really worked out in this first release of the game, but that's not really the fault of the Backbone. Assetto Corsa Mobile just hasn't got the settings right for sensitivity, and the throttle and brake controls weren't analog to begin with. And that's what brings me to the next possible issue with the Backbone on iOS. Mostly every game is designed for touchscreen controls, and that means that if you're a controller user, you're almost always going to be a second or maybe third-class citizen. If you don't have access to Xbox Cloud Gaming, Steam Link, or PlayStation Remote Play, you'll need to temper your expectations because the games that are designed with controller in mind work great, but you'll frequently run into situations where controllers should be supported and just isn't. Or it'll be supported and just not offer the advantage that you were kind of expecting. Except actually for this, which is Frogger. It's normally played in portrait mode, but if you put it in landscape mode, it automatically rotates so that you can actually play it here with the Backbone controller, which remember, you can't actually play in portrait mode because the port to plug it in is right here. Before we get into the games that didn't work all that well, let's talk about a couple more games that did. Minecraft is a game I love playing on my PS Vita and Nintendo Switch, but I've always kinda hated playing it on iOS. In some ways, it makes sense being able to touch the screen anywhere and have quick, accurate inventory management and object placement, but for whatever reason, playing with a controller or mouse just feels more efficient and streamlined to me. It's probably just that I hate hovering my fingers out of the way to touch the screen with my index finger. Anyway, Minecraft with analog sticks and buttons is excellent. no surprises there. Then there's Genshin Impact. This game looks incredible, and if you've played it on console or PC with a controller, you know what to expect here. It's one of the many games that was built with consoles in mind. In fact, it's here that you start to realize that having physical buttons means that you can now do more complex maneuvers, like cancelling the bow and arrow into a dash, or jump without the gap that you'd normally have when lifting your thumb off the screen to press a different button. So, another game designed for console that works well with Backbone. And let's not forget that this is easily one of the biggest, most visually stunning games on iOS. So with the Backbone, your thumbs are no longer blocking the screen. As for fighting games, I found Brawlhalla, which I've heard of many times before, but never tried because the characters and art style just didn't appeal to me originally. But having played it on iOS with the Backbone, I'm super impressed. And if you're looking for a game that feels like Smash Bros on your smartphone, this game runs well and should scratch that platform fighting itch. But for me, I'm more of a 2D Street Fighter person. And this is where it starts to get a little more frustrating. See, fighting games haven't always been that big on mobile, and generally speaking, they're usually like cut down versions of the arcade or the original console games. So ultimately, if you want to play like the smoothest version of the game with a player base that is actually existent online, then you would usually play on PC or the console version of the game. But remember the promise? A mind-blowing new gaming experience awaits us. So let's see just how much blowing our minds can take before they completely explode. First, I tried the hilariously titled SkullGirls Fighting RPG, which is trying to be a standard gacha game, but with a fighting game for the battles. After booting it up and being forced through the usual "please don't close this free app that you've invested no money into" tutorial, I finally got to the training mode, where I discovered this fighting game doesn't actually work with a controller. Oops. How about King of Fighters? They somehow managed to compress the hell out of King of Fighters 13 and make it run on iOS about 9 years ago. And to be honest, it's actually really impressive. It gets around the issue of pressing simultaneous buttons by swapping some of the punches and kicks for combinations of buttons to do things like evasive maneuvers. But the best part is that unlike many other mobile conversions, you perform special moves just like the original game. If you're new to fighting games, this is actually pretty important because in traditional fighting games like Street Fighter, your special moves are usually tied to the same controls that you use for navigation. So to do certain moves, you'll have to actually hold down back or hold down forward while pressing with certain buttons to do the move. And this way, particularly strong moves can be balanced so that before you actually do the move, you have to press forward, which means you have to stop blocking. It goes much, much deeper than that, but basically, this quirk of fighting games is often what makes them so much fun to play. Now, I say KOF is impressive, but the D-pad on the Backbone is quite flat compared to a PlayStation controller. As a result, it's not always clear when you've returned to neutral, so moves like dragon punches, which are forward, down, down forward, feel a little mushy unless you have a habit of lifting your thumb off the pad a bit. That being said, I was hugely impressed to discover that the D-pad has a pivot in the middle. If you don't speedrun platform games or play fighting games often, you may not have even noticed that many of your third-party controllers don't have a pivot on the middle of the D-pad on your controller. But if you decide to get into fighting games someday, you quickly discover that blocking and walking forwards and switching back and forth very quickly is really common and very important. And if your controller presses down in the middle and activates all the buttons, you end up in what's called neutral, which means you're not really pressing any buttons, so you're neither blocking nor walking forwards. Not exactly a situation you want to be in when you ideally should be blocking. But the Backbone does have a pivot in the middle, and so for this reason alone, I think Backbone deserves a massive pat on the back because this is a feature that a great many controller companies just completely don't think about. The other fighting games I tried were Street Fighter 4 and Garou Mark of the Wolves. Honestly, apart from these ports, there really aren't that many to choose from. Street Fighter was impressive when it came out, but it still uses a reduced set of buttons, so even though the original game had 3 punches and 3 kicks, having shoulder buttons on the Backbone offers no real advantage because you have 1 punch, 1 kick, and combination buttons. Then there's Mark of the Wolves, which is one of the only fighters out there that maintains the original 2-punch, 2-kick layout of the original. I was very pleased about that, but the game is so out of date that on the current version of iOS, it doesn't even play music or sound effects anymore. Ultimately, if you're looking into buying a Backbone just to turn your iPhone into a portable fighting game machine, I really can't recommend it. Don't get me wrong, for third-party Joy-Con level of quality, this is actually quite impressive. It feels well built and the controls are all there and it's what you would expect from something like a Nintendo Switch. Trying to enjoy fighting games on your iPhone literally makes no sense when there are much better platforms out there like Nintendo Switch, which has been out for like 3 or 4 years, and it's got Ultra Street Fighter 2, Dragon Ball Fighters, Power Rangers Battle for the Grid, it's got BlazBlue Cross Tag Battle, Smash Ultimate, the list goes on and on. Trying to play fighting games on your iPhone is like trying to draw a picture with soy sauce. It works, but you shouldn't. Better tools already exist. I had a good browse of Apple Arcade and searched for controller-compatible games. Not really sure what I was expecting to find, but essentially games like Tetris Beat taught me one more very important thing about the backbone. It's landscape only on a device with plenty of games that could have worked just fine with it, but thanks to your status as a second-class citizen in iOS, don't expect any of these games to offer a landscape option ever. What Backbone needed really was some kind of rotating clip in the middle, but that would have made it even more expensive. And really, this thing feels like a $60 Joy-Con replacement. That being said, maybe a clever innovation like a rotating clip might even have justified a $120 or $130 price tag. Which brings me to one very important question about the Backbone. For the average Apple consumer, spending $1,000 every year on a new iPhone might seem quite normal, and so spending $100 on this contraption which fits the current iPhone but might not fit the next iPhone and only works in landscape mode, but does give you sort of Joy-Con level controls on your games, maybe that makes total sense. But apart from the D-pad, analog sticks, and the buttons, what exactly does this $100 device really offer you? Well, it's two things really. Check out the over-engineering on this. This is so hilariously over-engineered that I think you're actually going to fall in love with it the first time you do it, because check this out. As you pull it open, the gearing system is perfectly tuned and engineered so that as you pull it, not the left side first or the right side first, both open at exactly the same speed, so you reveal that beautiful Backbone logo, which looks like an MMO religion, by the way. It opens up at a perfect speed so you see it all in nice symmetry. Awesome, right? The other brilliant feature you get is these two buttons on the face, which could have been useful, but instead are hardwired to load up the Backbone app. I guess the idea is to provide a console-like experience that shows you a home screen with your games and social information, but I really don't like being asked to sign up for yet more social networks. Maybe if they let you sign up with an email address, I might have been happier to use it, but giving no other option than to use your Apple ID kind of annoyed me, and even when I did try it, I couldn't figure out how to change my status to away or appear offline. Basically, it's a social network, but with none of the convenient privacy features offered by other networks like Discord. The last game I tried was Call of Duty Mobile. I don't play that many FPS games, but I tried this one, and the results were actually pretty interesting. Touch controls are much faster at flicky movements than analog stick, but I felt much more comfortable with analog stick because I'm used to it. That being said, the benefit over touchscreen is the same as Genshin Impact in that you're no longer covering the screen, and if you need to turn for an extended period, your thumb doesn't end up trailing across the screen or having to lift up to reset position and touch the screen again. And of course, being able to hold a shoulder button to aim while firing with a separate finger is so much better than combining everything into a single touchscreen gesture. So comparatively speaking, analog is a little bit slower, but unless we had controls like the touchpads on the upcoming Steam Deck, I think I'll stick with the analog sticks on the Backbone just because at least my thumbs aren't covering the screen. So, what do we think overall of the Backbone controller for your iPhone? Well, basically, I feel like there's nothing you can complain about with the construction of this thing. It's cool, it's got this novelty engineering system, and the buttons and the analog sticks and these triggers all feel really good. You get access to analog triggers, get access to analog sticks. They actually click on the inside for games that are compatible with that, especially if you're using Remote Play or Xbox Game Pass. I guess the only real qualm I have with it is that it's landscape only, and it only really fits the current iPhone. Obviously, if your iPhone gets longer and longer, it's going to fit anything up to like 10 inches wide. But if you needed to use an iPhone that goes lower than this lower lip here, then once you try to fit it in like something lower like this, it's going to bump into this part here and it's not going to fit anymore. But apart from that, it has everything you could possibly ask for, including a headphone jack. So my iPhone, which already doesn't have an iPhone jack because it uses the Lightning port or the Bluetooth headphones, you know, having a headphone jack built into the controller is super convenient. I really liked that when I was just walking around shops and it's just like, I'm just going to whip this out and try some Genshin Impact while on the go. That was really, really convenient. And really nice that you've got this charging port here because obviously you don't have access to the original Lightning port while you're playing games. I guess if there were any changes I would ask them to make to a future version of the Backbone controller, it would be one, this is actually like my main one, is get rid of this Backbone button. I understand that you're trying to provide a smoother game console experience. But if people don't want to opt in to that Backbone system, that Backbone app social system, which presumably is just like collecting data on everyone and their gameplay habits and all that, I just think it would be nice if you could set this button to do useful things like go to your iPhone home screen as opposed to launch the Backbone app. Another two things are I would prefer if the D-pad were a little bit higher. Like when you rock back and forth, I don't feel a whole lot of confidence because it is quite a flat D-pad. So when you do something like a Dragon Punch, you feel like down, and then you don't really feel like the whole D-pad is lifted up. So not my favorite D-pad of all time, but it is serviceable. And the last thing I'd like to see is the ability to have the iPhone plug in landscape as normal, but also be able to rotate it to play games that are in portrait mode, because that doesn't actually look too bad, having a portrait console in the middle of this controller. I think that would be really nice, because although Frogger automatically rotates the screen so that you can play it in landscape mode, don't expect that level of hospitality to be like the norm in other games on iOS. Essentially, that's how I feel about the Backbone controller. I think physically, it's got all the buttons in all the right places. I think it kind of irks me that you're being like pushed so hard to use the Backbone app and join the Backbone community. I really don't jive with that. But if in fact cloud gaming is going to be as solid as people are kind of promising that it's going to be in the future, this is probably going to be fantastic, because I don't want to always be carrying an extra game console around with me. But if I've got my iPhone and this Backbone, which is super small and super light, I can just click this onto my iPhone and just jump straight into actual console gaming, of course with the slight delay of the internet. But when you think about the future and cloud gaming, this sort of thing does make a lot of sense. If you're not interested in cloud gaming, there are some games that work really well with this controller, like Genshin Impact and some of the racing games. And I don't know, if you want to play Call of Duty with an analog stick, then the Backbone probably works quite well. If there's one place I can't really recommend it, it's fighting games. Just the time for fighting games on your iPhone is not today. So if you are in that category of people who are going for cloud gaming, or you play games like Minecraft or Genshin Impact or many of the other games that actually work and are designed for use with controller, I think you're going to love this, because it just puts a smile on your face every time you open it up and slide something into it. You're just like, oh yeah, that's kind of clever. Anyway, that's all for this video. Don't forget to like the video, please subscribe to the channel, and do leave a comment. I'm very curious, because there's like millions of games in the App Store. What have you found works really well for controller-based games on iOS? And particularly, what would work well with the Backbone, considering that, it only works in landscape mode, but, I think there's actually quite a lot of games out there, and damn, Genshin Impact is so good. So that's all for this video. You can join me on Twitter and on Discord, and until the next one, I'll see you around.